Flow, the movie that blew Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks and more out of the water on the Golden Globe Awards. So, did it deserve it? Was it good? What did it mean? We're going to discuss this all, so this is your warning for spoilers ahead. Flow has been on my radar for a while now, but what really pushed me to watch it was that one of my dear viewers was speculating that it could possibly be a little bit of an Oscar bait type of movie. He didn't mean it maliciously, he's right to be wary, as there indeed is a trend of those artsy, pretend deep kind of movies winning awards, even though they seemingly don't stand the test of time. So naturally, I was intrigued to find out, is that the case for the movie Flow? This video is the conclusion I've arrived at. Before we continue the review, I must warn you of my personal biases. I'm not a soft world building girl, I'm not an artsy movie girl either. There's a reason why the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy is my favorite. I like a heartfelt story about humanity. I like hard world building. I like me a grounded story, one that feels warm rather than deep. I think you can see what I'm getting at with this. A girl who likes to be grounded is reviewing a movie about a flow. Whatever could go right. That being said, I also like a good challenge. I often attempt to advocate for trying to see the world through perspectives that we don't quite align with, and so what better time to lead by example than now? I'll do my best to give Flow a fair chance, and I'll be taking a note when my opinions are biased by my personal taste. So without further ado, let's dive into the story of Flow and my understanding of it. Flow takes place in what seems to be our planet, and more specifically what seems to be a sort of post-apocalyptic time perhaps. There are traces of humans who lived in the area where the movie takes place, but no actual humans inside. All that's left from them are beautiful trinkets, temples, buildings, statues, and even one kitty drawing. This aspect of the movie draws attention to something that I think about often. Growing up and especially in school, I was never encouraged by the school system to work on my artistic interests. There seemed to be a list of subjects ranked by their perceived societal importance, and art wasn't amongst them. To this day, I see people around me not valuing enough the time and skill that goes into art and expecting it for free, while simultaneously belittling its importance. And yet, if we were to disappear right now, what will mostly be left behind from us is our art. Our architecture, the monuments we deemed worthy of creating, the little trinkets that bring us daily joy, that will be our trace. To this day, one of the very important cords that keeps us connected with the people of the past is their art. I'm not saying this to say that we should put art on a pedestal instead and belittle all else to get revenge of sorts, but rather that I enjoyed this visual reminder that Flow gives us of the importance of creation and how amazing art is for satisfying that primal human need to leave a trace that says, I was here, long after we're gone. Another important fact to keep in mind about the world of Flow is that there seem to be cyclical floods in it. And I do say cyclical because almost in the very beginning of the movie we see a boat stuck in a tree, and by the end of it we'll see that this phenomenon can occur after the floodwaters that had risen have now drained and left behind boats, stranded in trees, perhaps awaiting the next cycle of floods. I'm also left under the impression that the people who used to live in this place were aware of the floods. The abandoned household items we see in several places suggest that the people who inhabited the area were used to life near the water. They have boats, they have glass floats, jewelry made of shells, navigational tools, and so on. Furthermore, when we later pass through one of their abandoned cities, we're going to see that it was made with the rising water in mind, having structures in place for support and contraptions that perhaps lifted up items when needed. My assumption is that people lived for as long as they could in this ruled by floods environment until they couldn't take it anymore and moved away from the area. But that's my liking for hard world building, trying to make sense of the environment, when the creator of the movie himself mentioned in an interview that for him, the human lore wasn't all that interesting, and what matters most is the emotional journey of his characters.
For me, it wasn't important to tell this long exposition of this world or how the flood happened or where the humans. For me, that wasn't that interesting. It was more important to focus on the characters and their journeys, how they change throughout the story.
So let's explore who they are and what they go through. Our protagonist is a black kitty. Keep in mind there is no talking in the movie. All animals that we see act like animals. Though I do think by the end of the movie, those that we follow change in a way and become different compared to the average animal. But I'll talk about that later. The black kitty seems to roam the area surrounding a house that perhaps was the house of its past owner or somebody who loved cats, as the area is adorned with cat statues. From the beginning, we can see that the kitty is used to solitary life, and it's quite wary of its environment and other animals. There's a pack of dogs in the area, and the kitty isn't fond of them at all. And for good reasons too, they end up chasing it around, and overall they seem too loud for the kitty's liking. Though one of the dogs, a Labrador, does seem to be slightly different. It seems to like the kitty. At some point it even follows it around and tries to befriend it. Well, unsuccessfully so, at least for now. But so the days pass relatively peacefully until the time when the water returns. Its coming is announced by a herd of frightened deer, and maybe more interestingly than that, a distinct melody that does a great job of making you feel uneasy. Soon the water is too high to ignore and all animals have to leave their home. The pack of dogs ends up on a small boat, whereas the kitty gets saved last minute by a bigger boat that already has one passenger in it, and that's one very chill capybara. The next passengers that end up on the boat as the story progresses are one lemur that's very fascinated with human trinkets, the Labrador that got separated from its pack, and what I believe to be a secretary bird. But before I get into the psychological characteristics and development of the characters, I do need to get the chronology of the journey out of the way because it's not all that important, but at the same time you do need to be aware of it. So, the capybara saves the kitty, they float for some time, and they end up seeing the lemur sorting some trinkets in a broken structure amidst the water. The capybara lures the lemur into the boat with a basket of trinkets and saves it that way. The kitty accidentally falls off the boat and is about to drown, but then out of the murky waters, a giant figure emerges and saves the kitty. Said giant figure is a whale-like creature. It strongly resembles a whale, but has some fantastical aspects to its appearance. And after this event, the kitty, the capybara, and the lemur stop at an island where they meet the Labrador, who has been separated from the pack of dogs. The island where the animals have docked is inhabited by a flock of secretary birds. One of them has its eye on the kitty. It seems to like it, so it offers the kitty a fish. And later on, when the other secretary birds show hostility towards the kitty, the bird jumps to protect it. The bird fights its leader, but unfortunately it ends up losing, and so as punishment the leader breaks its wing. Wounded and unable to fly, the bird joins the boat crew. They float for some time and pass through the ruins of a city where they bear witness to this mesmerizing whale-like creature once more. So far, the kitty has fallen off the boat several times for several reasons, and it's always been an anxiety-inducing experience because it fears the water. But here, at long last, it observes the way the capybara swims, and it learns how to do it. With its newfound ability, the kitty jumps back into the water and catches some fish that it shares with the rest of the crew. The animals proceed to flow out of the city, and they stumble on the pack of dogs stranded amidst the vast water. The secretary bird doesn't want to save them, but the rest of the animals insist, and so they do. Soon after, the animals are caught in a storm, but around that time they manage to reach the rock pillars that they had been heading towards for some time now. The secretary bird gets off the boat and climbs on top of the pillars. The kitty follows it. There, at the top of the mountain, something magical happens. The water droplets that had been falling start flowing up, the environment begins to resemble an ocean and then the universe, and the secretary bird is taken up in the sky and disappears. The kitty tries to follow it, but it can't. It goes back to the real world, so to speak, and it looks around, and it sees that the boat with the other animal passengers is quite far away. It goes down the mountain and jumps into the water. It catches onto one of those glass float things, and that's how it floats in the water for a long time, until at some point the water drains and the kitty is now walking on solid ground. It runs around this new environment and first spots the lemur. The lemur is surrounded by other lemurs, and it hesitates should it follow the kitty. But eventually it does. Together they find their boat stranded up on a tree with the pack of dogs and the capybara in it. Through some collaboration, all animals get off the boat safely. Then, once more, we see a scared herd of deer, and we hear that distinct melody that last time signified the coming of the wave, but this time, there is no wave. The kitty starts running frantically and ends up spotting the whale creature stranded on land. They stare into each other's eyes. The whale seems to be in pain. The kitty is visibly sad and wants to help it, but it can't. Soon after, the other animals join the kitty. They huddle together and look at their reflections in the water. The end. Yeah, so that's the bare bones plot. Now let's go into theory land. To me, The animals seem to be in different stages of where they are mentally, if I may even word it like that. Imagine it like a ladder of growth, the type of growth that encompasses knowledge, intelligence, personal development, and so on. The secretary birds seem to be close to the top of the ladder. Perhaps because of their ability to have a bird's eye view, they see the bigger picture, they have broader horizons. All other animals are trapped within their immediate surroundings and their immediate issues, whereas the secretary birds have more freedom and broader outlook on life. However, that doesn't immediately make all of them kind and helpful. On the contrary, they're quite hostile towards other animals, perhaps looking down on them, realizing their limitations. This makes the secretary bird that defended the kitty special. Not only does it have the ability to see the bigger picture, but it wants to share it. I think this archetype, if I may call it like that, can be spotted in real life too. From my personal experience in university, which I don't claim to be universal, but it is what I observed, I got to meet so many academics who knew so much about their areas of expertise, but who for one reason or another lacked desire to share the knowledge that they have with those around them. I think they remind me of the majority of the secretary birds who have access to this higher knowledge, to this freeing perspective, and yet they stay confined within their small island, bickering amongst each other and being hostile towards those they don't deem worthy. But every once in a while there's somebody special among such crowds, somebody who realizes the value of sharing with others and supporting others, and that's how we get the secretary bird that chose to be shunned but pass on its knowledge. Perhaps in the kitty it recognized someone who will be receptive to its higher knowledge, even if they seemingly don't have the abilities to access it. After all, the kitty can't fly, but it can climb. There is a point in the movie when the secretary bird grabs the kitty and flies up high with it, and ever since that moment we see that the kitty is just enamored with that new perspective it got. It constantly seeks heights, often climbing the ship's mast, in the pursuit of seeing the world from above. So, I believe that it's this curiosity and receptiveness of new knowledge that made the kitty a worthy student, so to speak. That being said, craving new knowledge and perspectives isn't and shouldn't be the sole determiner of worth, and I think we see that exemplified in the character of the capybara. The capybara doesn't seem to crave change or any new knowledge, it's just there casually, being the most wonderful, calming presence in the movie. It's easily my favorite character. The way I love a grounding story, I love a grounding character. The capybara is the one animal I wouldn't even put on the ladder system of measuring growth. The capybara is outside of the system. It is this unbothered, stable presence that eases the anxiety of the kitty, and it's just there existing, not imposing itself on others. And yet, it does save the lemur, it does save the kitty, and it teaches the kitty how to swim, helping it overcome one of its major fears. For me, the capybara represents the fact that you don't actually need great knowledge and grand, broadened horizons to be a good being. But now let's go back to the ladder of growth. Below the secretary bird, as I already implied, is the kitty, and below it, I think, is the lemur. The lemur is a peculiar case. From his and his peers' obsession with human items to his complete engrossment with the mirror that's on the boat, there's something about the lemur that feels like it's calling out humanity, but I'm not sure exactly what. The movie is very particular about the concept of reflection and recognizing one's reflection. We spot it in the very beginning, when the kitty sees its reflection in the water, then in the window of the house that it lives in, and on the mirror on the boat too. Then up in the mountain, and in the last scene of the movie as well, where the crew of animals gather together and stares at their reflection in the water. I presume this recognition of one's reflection is a sort of mark of their growth, intelligence, and self-awareness. But at the same time, the lemur's obsession with it is presented in a negative light. Perhaps a cautionary message that understanding of the self shouldn't turn into obsession with the self. I suppose that's the lesson that the lemur has to learn. Towards the very end of the movie, when the floodwaters have drained, the kitty does find the lemur on a throne-like structure surrounded by other lemurs, clinging onto the mirror and staring at its reflection. It is the kitty, it hears its call for help, but the power of the mirror is too strong. The lemur hesitates for quite some time, but eventually it manages to overcome this self-obsession of sorts, and it goes to help the kitty and the other animals. Perhaps in a way reminding us that the love for the self should be balanced with the love for others. Lastly on the ladder, we have the dogs. The pack of dogs are used primarily to contrast the change that has taken place in the crew of main characters. In the beginning of the movie, we meet the pack of dogs running around and chasing a wild rabbit, and we end the movie with them trying to help the capybara get off the boat that's stuck in a tree, until they see a rabbit again, forget their task, and start chasing it once more, endangering the life of the capybara. This, I believe, exemplifies their lack of growth and development. And this feeling of mine is strengthened by one more scene. It occurs around the time the stranded pack gets saved by the animals against the secretary bird's wishes. I'd like to think that the secretary bird didn't want them on the boat, as it knew they are not changed, neither are they ready for change. But either way, the dogs do get on the boat, they create chaos, one of them eats the fish that we just watched the kitty catch after so many hurdles, after almost drowning several times, until it finally learned to swim. The fish which it shared with the crew, overcoming its solitary tendencies. We see that exact fish that encompasses in its tiny body all of the kitty's growth and personal development being gobbled in a second by one of the dogs, not much thought put into its action. The second thing that the dogs do, that I believe is symbolic in some way, is they notice the mirror, but instead of being fascinated by it, they end up breaking it, to the great devastation of the lemur. All of this behavior exhibited by the pack of dogs is frustrating for the main crew, but it is also very animal-like, which leads me to believe that by the end of the journey, the crew that we follow cannot be considered regular animals. Something in them has changed. But there's one more character that I haven't talked about yet. A character that was part of the pack of dogs until it wasn't. And that's the Labrador. The Labrador forgoes a development of its own. It starts off as a very sweet, very pure-hearted character that is unfortunately too dependent on its group. And by the end of the story, it does seem to have learned to make its own decisions and be more independent. This is well exemplified in the same scene towards the end, where the pack of other dogs gets distracted by the wild rabbit, and for a moment the Labrador is ready to follow them, but then it thinks about it, changes its mind, and helps save the capybara. And so I believe by the end of the journey, all of the main crew of animals that we follow ends up climbing that growth ladder in one way or another, giving us valuable nuggets of wisdom to ponder over. There are a couple of symbols from the movie that I can't necessarily fit in the individual character growth analysis, but I still found interesting, so I'll highlight them here. One of them was that of the mountain pillars. As we know, the mountain in mythology is the space that connects the earth with the sky, our realm with that of the gods or whatever higher power. Given what happened on top of the mountain pillars, namely the scene where the water droplets go up and turn into the universe as the bird is taken and disappears, I think it's safe to assume that those pillars represent a higher spiritual power. Ever since the bird showed the kitty the world from above, it did seem like the kitty was most focused on none other than the mountain pillars themselves. We do see it constantly turning its eyes towards them, looking for them in dire situations, as if searching for their guidance. The idea of some sort of spiritual presence, I believe, is further amplified by the fact that we see the kitty and the bird looking at the beautiful aurora in the night sky. The northern lights are believed in some cultures to be the souls of departed loved ones, and given the fact that the bird was taken up in the sky in a sort of a magical almost fashion, I am inclined to believe that there's some spiritual presence hinted in the story. In terms of what the departure of the bird meant metaphorically, I assume that it signified that it has accomplished its task of guiding the kitty and sharing the knowledge with it, and is now elevated to a higher level somewhere above the growth ladder. Another seemingly important symbol was that of the circular maze. We can spot it in several places. For example, the mirror that the lemur stares at is circular, and it does seem to have a maze-like pattern around its border. We do see a circular maze of deer in a dream that the kitty has. In it, the deer are circling around the kitty, with the mountain pillars threateningly looming from above. And of course, we see the circular maze on top of the mountain pillars. After the universe has taken the bird up, so to speak, the kitty is brought back to Earth, in the very middle of a maze-like pattern. In terms of what does the maze represent, perhaps the journey of the self, the path towards self-discovery and improvement. But if you've more educated guesses, I'd love to hear about them. I must mention that on a personal level, I wasn't a huge fan of all those more spiritual scenes because they felt tonally off to me. In my mind, I had just adjusted to the fact that we're following regular non-magical animals on a regular journey, so the more spiritual aspects felt kinda jarring to me. It just didn't feel organically introduced. An example of naturally introduced spiritualism is the one in Brother Bear. I loved everything spirit related there. I think it was beautifully incorporated in the story. But then again, they had the luxury of dialogue, whereas here I suppose we were introduced to the more magical aspects of the movie together with the animals as they experienced them, so I can't be too mad about it. On the flip side though, there were aspects, or rather full scenes of the movie that I really liked and I found to be quite well portrayed, so I want to highlight them too. As I already mentioned several times, the kitty has a fear of water, and as it so happens, I do too. It is not that I fear water, but the unfathomable depth of the ocean and the concept of no solid ground under my feet makes me deeply unsettled. I also don't like whales. I find their sounds disturbingly horrifying. I know that a lot of people find them soothing, but I just wasn't blessed by Poseidon. There's a lot about the ocean that I'm deeply unsettled by. So I really like the scenes that portrayed the kitty's anxiety around water and that sense of helplessness one might feel. I think they captured the emotions well. And on that note, probably my favorite scene was when the kitty had fallen in the water, and after several desperate attempts to stay afloat, it had given up. And right in that time, we see a giant figure lurking in the gloomy water, and all my fears of whales rushed all at once through my mind, just to see that the giant was in fact gentle, and it brought the kitty back to the surface. There was something healing in that scene, the decision to not lean into people's fears, because trust me, I know I'm not alone in this. Thalassophobia is quite popular. So the decision to not lean into people's fears, but instead present the whale as a giant, ancient almost, fantastical looking, benevolent creature was something that made me smile. Speaking of the whale, remember towards the end I told you it was stranded and the kitty was sad it can't save it? Well, after the credits we do get one final scene that I purposefully omitted till now, and it's of the water around sunset, and there in the distance we see the whale peacefully swimming. I suppose if you needed one more confirmation that the floods are cyclical, that's one for you, but I also suppose this scene exists as a nice glimmer of hope for all those who watched the kitty stare into the dying whale's eyes and felt its inability to do anything within its power, for those who feel that there is a lot of hurt happening in the world and they suffer the pressure from the realization of their inability to fix it all. For those people, a small glimmer of hope that reminds us that the world is cyclical, that every winter is followed by spring, that every night is followed by day, and that even if we feel helpless, it doesn't mean that the situation is hopeless. So, that's pretty much my understanding of Flow. Of course, I could be absolutely wrong, but from what I saw, the director seemed like the kind of guy who'd enjoy his audience creating conversations around his work, even if the analysis don't perfectly reflect what he thinks. That's why I implore you to share your opinions too. I think the movie makes for a fun discussion. And now the time has come for me to share what I think about Flow. Is it Oscar baity? Are the people who dislike its victory justified in their opinion? And so on. First up, I think the creator of Flow is very passionate and has been pursuing his dreams and artistic concepts for a long time now. The Hollywood Reporter says this for him. Zilbalodis was still in high school in Latvia and dreaming of a career in animation when he created a short film inspired by his pet feline. It was a simple tale about a cat who overcomes his fear of water. Many years later, says Zilbalodis, I decided to revisit this premise and make a feature film. Additionally, his first full-length animated feature, Away, is described by Set the Tape as so. There is no dialogue of any kind, no additional backstory or flashbacks. The plot follows a young boy, the lone survivor of some kind of plane accident, racing across the deserted wilderness back to civilization, pursued every step of the way by a lumbering but ceaseless giant spirit that drains the life out of any creature it comes across. Given this context, and the fact that the director worked on his first film alone, I am inclined to think that his works aren't a bait of any sort, but rather a representation of the artistic and aesthetic themes that interest him personally. That being said, I know for myself personally that I'll be dishonest if I told you that I'll be rewatching Flow on my free time, or that it will be going in some sort of core memory folder of mine. I like a think piece, I like an aesthetic movie, but those that have stayed with me throughout the years usually speak something to me personally. Something about humanity, something about the ways I feel about the world, something about the way I like living life. And that's just what I'm personally interested in. I know that there are people who will cherish Flow way better than I will, but I also understand why there are other people who had other favorites in the line of contestants, and I understand why they'd be upset that what they liked didn't win. But ultimately, I am happy for Flow's success. I am of the opinion that awards mean barely anything. They mean barely anything to me, and I'm willing to bet they mean barely anything to you too. When they're not personal, that is. They come and go, they amuse us for the time being, and we move on and forget. But awards are not completely meaningless. I think in such times as the ones we're living in, times of what seems to be creative drought and constant viewer dissatisfaction, there are plenty of small artists who have a unique vision of the world that they are yearning to share. This award might be their beacon of hope, that it doesn't matter that they are small, that it doesn't matter that they are not born in one of the big countries. As long as they work very hard and passionately, they will have a chance to reach a lot of us and share their vision of the world with us. And hopefully, maybe even partially because of Flow, one day we'll live in a time where profits won't be the only creative motivator, and more passionate people will have the ability to create work that makes the world a warmer, kinder, and more beautiful of a place.